Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Crapo and Ranking Member Wyden, and welcome to the committee. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for your willingness to serve our country. I'd like to start with something that I don't think gets brought up a lot in Finance Committee, which is the issue of tribal relations. And Mr. Chair, the Treasury Department has made great progress towards improving its government-to-government relationships with tribal nations, including establishing the Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee and the Tribal Affairs Office. This has benefited tribal nations, and it is also very important to Minnesota, and I think it's also helped the Treasury Department work better. So I want to just focus on this and ask you, will you commit to ensuring that the Treasury Department does uphold its government-to-government relationships with tribal nations and maintaining this statutorily mandated advisory committee and the office?
Senator, I was the Treasury point of contact for tribal consultations in the first Trump administration. I, in fact, attended a tribal event in Minnesota, and I was present at the initial meeting of the Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee, and I commit to you that we will continue to recognize tribes as governments and work with them to address their revenue issues that they have with the Treasury Department. And it was partially under my leadership that we recognized that an office focused on the unique issues of tribes was a more appropriate organizational structure than what it was when I first entered.
Thank you. I'm aware of your leadership on this, and I want to thank you for that. And I think it's important that that Office of Tribal Affairs stays in place. You established it, as I understand, and so we can keep it there. So you will make sure that if the Doge boys come in and decide that this is a place to find so-called efficiencies, that you will stand up to that.
Again, Senator, it makes sense to have people who are specialized in these activities because the issues for tribes are unique, and so it makes sense to have a separate set of specialists who focus on that. I would view it as inefficient to eliminate that specialization.
Okay, thank you. I'm not trying to trap you on this. I just want to make sure that people who understand how this works are making the decisions about how to staff it and how to manage it and how to organize it, and not folks that are, coming from another place. Let me ask you, let me find my notes here. Let me ask you this question. There's a lot of talk right now about the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling was breached in January. We are in the process of evaluating this massive budget reconciliation bill. And I know that Treasury is currently deploying extraordinary measures to delay default on our national debt. And I want to ask you about the interplay between that challenge and also what's happening at the IRS. So the administration has already begun firing about 6,000 IRS employees last month, and the reports are that DOGE is also working on a plan to cut the IRS workforce in half. And I want you to address for us what the logic is behind those staff reductions and what impact you think that will have on the national debt that we are grappling with.
Thank you, Senator. As I mentioned earlier, I know that the Secretary has approved some initial reductions in the IRS. They were not in the taxpayer services area, so the Secretary has committed to there being no disruption to this year's filing season. Those reductions would take us back down to IRS personnel levels that we had during the first Trump administration, where we continued to successfully collect revenues. So I am not anticipating that there's going to be any disruption in our ability to engage in this filing, to engage in the collections at the IRS this filing season or thereafter. As I mentioned earlier, I have not been briefed on any plan other than what I just described as far as a further reduction in personnel at the IRS.
So I'm sure you're aware that in the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress substantially increased the staffing in IRS enforcement. And just as an example of the impact and the efficiencies of that, through that work, we were able to achieve $1 billion in increased enforcement from about 1,600 high-wage millionaire delinquent taxpayers, high-wage folks that were not paying their taxes. Thanks to the work of the IRA and additional enforcement at the IRS, we were able to accomplish that. I mean, can you acknowledge that that was a good return on investment for us to make, to make sure that we have accountability and people are just paying what they are owed?
Senator, I've not yet been briefed on what additional revenues came in as a result of that additional activity. Where I think we can agree is probably the best way we can get better collections is to improve the modernization of the systems, so that rather than working off of 1960 systems, we can actually have IRS enforcement activities focused on where fraud is most likely taking place.
Well, I know I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. I mean, these numbers come from IRS press releases. I'm sure they're accurate, and I think that this is not, if you don't have people doing the enforcement, then you're not going to get the enforcement that you need. That's a different issue from technology, but thank you, Mr. Chair.